These are the 5 places that, according to St. John Paul II, are working against the prayers and blessings of Catholic women who leave their rosaries there overnight without knowing it. And I am going to show you the 5th and most dangerous place, then the 4th place, then the 3rd, then the 2nd, all the way down to the 1st, the one that is probably already in your American home right now, the bathroom. The bathroom is where Pope John Paul II warned that sacred objects absorb spiritual impurity overnight, because it is the one room in your home where the body releases what it cannot keep. And when a rosary blessed for protection rests in that space for hours in darkness, it absorbs what was meant to leave. Margaret Thornton, 73, from Akron, Ohio, kept her rosary on the bathroom counter for 11 years because she prayed it every morning while getting ready. And when a visiting priest blessed her home in 2019, he asked her to move it immediately. Within 6 days, her daughter called her for the first time in 2 years. Later in this video, we have the 3rd place, the 4th place, and the 5th and most dangerous place, according to St. John Paul II. And now, the 2nd place. The drawer where you keep broken things. Pope John Paul II taught that a rosary is not a decoration or a memory. It is a living weapon of intercession, and when it rests among objects that no longer serve their purpose, objects you have kept because you cannot decide whether to repair them or release them, the rosary begins to carry the spiritual weight of that indecision. When you pray with a rosary that has spent the night surrounded by brokenness, you are praying with something that has absorbed the energy of incompletion. This is not superstition. This is the same principle Pope John Paul II applied to his own chapel after the assassination attempt in 1981. He removed from his private prayer space anything that carried the memory of violence or unfinished grief, because he understood that what surrounds a sacred object during the hours of darkness becomes part of what that object transmits during the hours of light. Dorothy Harper, 68, from Grand Rapids, Michigan, kept her mother's rosary in the kitchen drawer with broken scissors, a cracked picture frame, and a watch that had stopped working in 2003. She prayed that rosary every single night for 14 years and could not understand why her prayers felt like they were hitting a ceiling. Her sister visited in the summer of 2021 and opened the drawer to find a pen. And when she saw the rosary surrounded by broken objects, she said, "You're keeping Mama's beads with all this junk." Dorothy moved the rosary to a small wooden box on her nightstand that same afternoon. Within 3 weeks, her son, who had not spoken to her in over a year, showed up at her door and asked if they could start over. Later in this video, we have the 4th place and the 5th and most dangerous place, according to St. John Paul II, and now the 3rd place, on top of the television. Pope John Paul II wrote in his 1987 encyclical Redemptoris Mater that the Rosary is Mary's school of contemplation, and contemplation requires interior silence, the kind of silence that cannot coexist with the constant noise of images and voices designed to capture your attention and keep it captured. When you leave your rosary on top of the television overnight, even when the television is turned off, the rosary rests in the one place in your American home where distraction is the primary spiritual activity. Pope John Paul II himself refused to have a television in his private quarters at the Vatican, not because he condemned media, but because he understood that a space dedicated to prayer cannot also be a space designed for passive consumption. He knew this from personal experience. He had lived through decades when his own country, Poland, was flooded with images meant to replace faith with ideology, and he saw what happened to people who could no longer tell the difference between what they believed and what they had been told to believe. The Rosary is the opposite of that passivity. It is active engagement with the mysteries of Christ through the intercession of Mary. And when it spends the night absorbing the residue of whatever played on that screen during the day, Whether news or entertainment or arguments or fear, it carries that residue into your hands the next time you pray. Helen Morrison, 71, from Tucson, Arizona, kept her rosary on top of the television in her living room for 9 years. She had placed it there after her husband died in 2012 because the living room was where she felt closest to him. They had watched the evening news together every night for 43 years. She prayed the rosary every afternoon at 3 o'clock, sitting in the same chair where her husband used to sit, and she could not understand why her prayers felt so anxious, why every mystery felt like it was competing with something else for her attention. In May of 2021, her niece stayed with her for a week and noticed the rosary on the television. She asked Helen, "Aunt Helen, do you pray this here?" Helen said, "I pray it every day, right here in this chair." Her niece said, "But you're holding it after it's been sitting on top of all that noise." Helen moved the rosary to a small table beside her prayer corner that same evening, away from the television, away from the news, away from the voices. The next afternoon, when she prayed at 3 o'clock, she said the Hail Mary felt different, like the words were finally reaching where they were supposed to go instead of scattering. Within 2 months, she had started a rosary group at her parish, something she had wanted to do for years but had never felt strong enough to begin. And the fifth and most dangerous place, according to St. John Paul II, is coming. And now, the fourth place, underneath your pillow. This is the place Pope John Paul II himself addressed in his private correspondence with a Carmelite nun in Krakow in 1999, a letter that was not made public until after his canonization in 2014. And in that letter, he wrote that the rosary is a companion to prayer but not a substitute for vigilance. And when a Catholic places the rosary under her pillow at night, believing it will protect her while she sleeps, she is transferring to an object the spiritual responsibility that belongs to her relationship with God. The rosary does not protect you by proximity, it protects you by prayer. And when you place it under your pillow and fall asleep without praying it, you are asking it to do something it was never blessed to do. Pope John Paul II understood this danger personally because he had seen it in Poland during the years of communist oppression, when Catholics who could not attend Mass openly began to treat their rosaries like talismans, objects that carried power simply by being present. And he saw what happened when devotion became separated from relationship, when people believed they were protected by what they owned instead of by who they loved. The rosary under the pillow is one of the most common practices among faithful American Catholic women, and it is also one of the least understood. Because the intention is beautiful, the desire to keep something sacred close during the vulnerable hours of sleep. But the consequence is that the rosary spends the entire night in a place where you are unconscious, where you are not praying, where you are not engaging the mysteries, where the beads absorb the content of your dreams and your fears and your unprocessed grief without the protection of your conscious prayer. When you wake in the morning and reach for that rosary, you are reaching for something that has spent 8 hours soaking in everything your mind released while you were not watching. Barbara Keller, 74, from Charleston, South Carolina, placed her rosary under her pillow every single night for 16 years. She had started the practice after her sister died in 2005. She wanted to feel protected. She wanted to feel like Mary was watching over her while she slept. She prayed the rosary every morning when she woke, but she could not understand why her mornings felt so heavy, why the first decade always felt like she was dragging herself through fog. Her sleep was restless, her dreams were often disturbing, and she woke most mornings feeling like she had been fighting something all night. In the spring of 2019, she attended a parish mission led by a visiting priest from Indiana, and during his talk on Marian devotion, he said, "If you're keeping your rosary under your pillow, you're asking Mary to do your praying for you while you sleep, and that's not how the rosary works." Barbara felt those words like a hand on her shoulder. That night, she moved her rosary from under her pillow to the small table beside her bed, where she could see it when she woke, but where it was not buried in the space of her unconscious hours. She prayed it that night before she went to sleep, instead of waiting until morning. The next morning she woke and the heaviness was gone, not completely, but noticeably lighter, like a window had been opened in a room that had been closed for years. Within 3 weeks, her sleep had changed, her dreams were quieter, and the rosary in the morning felt like a conversation instead of a task. A visiting friend from her parish, Joan Sullivan, 70, from Savannah, Georgia, told Barbara in 2020 that she had done the same thing, kept her rosary under her pillow for 12 years, and when she moved it to her nightstand and began praying it before bed instead of after waking, her anxiety at night disappeared within 2 weeks. The teaching Pope John Paul II left in that private letter, the one that was not widely known until years after his death, was this: the Rosary is a school of prayer, and school requires your presence, your attention, your voice. It does not happen while you sleep. After hearing this, after seeing what changed when the rosary was no longer under the pillow, but beside the bed, prayed with intention instead of carried as a charm, I want you to look at your own home tonight. I want you to verify whether your rosary is in a place where it is surrounded by your conscious prayer, or a place where it is absorbing what you are not praying through. Write in the comments tonight, I verify, because verification is not suspicion. Verification is the act of a woman who loves God enough to make sure that nothing in her home is working against what she is praying for. I want you to look at the spaces in your home where you have placed sacred objects and ask yourself, is this object resting in a space of prayer or a space of distraction? Is it surrounded by silence or by noise, by intention or by accident? Write in the comments, I identify, because identifying the places where your rosary has been resting without protection is not an accusation. It is the beginning of clearing the path between your prayers and the God who hears them. You have now received 4 of the 5 places Pope John Paul II warned against, and what you have received so far has already shown you that the objects you thought were protecting you may have been resting in places that blocked their power without you ever knowing why. What remains is the most dangerous place of all, the place that is so embedded in American Catholic practice that most women never question it, and the place that Pope John Paul II himself identified as the single greatest obstacle to the rosary's full power in a faithful woman's life. And now, the 5th and most dangerous place, according to St. John Paul II, inside your purse. This is the place Pope John Paul II addressed most directly, not in a published encyclical, but in a documented conversation with Cardinal Christoph Schönborn of Vienna in 2003. A conversation that was recorded in the Cardinal's personal journal and later shared during a symposium on Marian devotion in Rome in 2016. Cardinal Schönborn wrote that Pope John Paul II told him, "The rosary that lives in a woman's purse is a rosary that prays for everything except God, because the purse is the place where a woman carries the entire world she is trying to manage, her money, her keys, her lists, her medicines, her receipts, her unfinished tasks. And when the rosary is buried at the bottom of that space, touching everything she is anxious about, it becomes tangled, not just physically but spiritually, in the very things she is praying to be freed from." This is the danger Pope John Paul II understood from his own years of hearing confessions, from his years of walking alongside people who were faithful and devoted and still felt that their prayers were not reaching heaven. And when he looked at what they were doing, he saw the same pattern again and again. The rosary was present in their lives, but it was not separate from their lives. It was mixed into the chaos, instead of being the anchor that pulled them out of it. Louise Bennett, 76, from Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, carried her rosary in her purse for 19 years. She had received the rosary as a gift from her mother in 2002. a beautiful set of sterling silver beads that her mother had blessed at the National Shrine in Washington, and Louise wanted to keep it close. She wanted to have it with her everywhere she went, so that she could pray it whenever she had a few extra minutes. In the waiting room at the doctor's office, in the car before going into the grocery store, during her lunch break when she was still working. It seemed like the most faithful thing she could do to keep the rosary with her at all times. But over the years, the rosary became buried. It sank to the bottom of her purse underneath her wallet and her checkbook and her bottle of aspirin and the folded grocery list she kept forgetting to throw away and the little notebook where she wrote down things she needed to remember, and the packet of tissues, and the loose change, and the keys to her daughter's house that she had been meaning to return for 6 months. Every time she reached into her purse to find the rosary, she had to dig past everything else first, and by the time she pulled it out, the beads were tangled around her reading glasses or caught on the zipper of her coin purse, and she would spend the first 2 minutes of prayer just trying to untangle it. She prayed the rosary almost every day, but she could not understand why it felt like such a struggle, why she felt more frustrated after praying than she did before, why the decades felt like she was trying to concentrate in the middle of a crowded room. In the fall of 2021, Louise attended a day of recollection at a nearby retreat center, and during the afternoon session, the retreat leader, a Franciscan sister who had spent years in Poland, mentioned in passing that Pope John Paul II had once told a group of Polish women that the rosary should never share space with money or keys, because those objects carry the weight of the world's demands, and the rosary is meant to carry you out of those demands, not sit beside them. Louise heard those words and felt something unlock in her chest. She had never thought of it that way. She had thought she was being devout by keeping the rosary close. But she realized in that moment that close was not the same as sacred, that carrying the rosary in the same space where she carried her anxieties meant the rosary was soaking in those anxieties 8 hours a day. That evening when she got home, she took the rosary out of her purse. She untangled it one last time. She placed it in a small wooden box on the table beside the chair where she prayed every morning, and she made a decision. The rosary would stay in that box. It would not travel with her. It would not go to the grocery store or the doctor's office or the bank. It would be in one place, a place set apart, and when she prayed it, it would be free from everything else. The next morning, when she sat down to pray, the rosary was exactly where she had left it, untangled, waiting, and when she picked it up, it felt different in her hands, lighter somehow, like it had been resting instead of working. She prayed the first decade and realized she had not thought about her grocery list once. She prayed the second decade and felt the words settling into her chest instead of bouncing off the surface. By the end of the rosary, she was crying, not because something was wrong, but because something had finally come back, the feeling she remembered from years ago when prayer felt like relief instead of effort. The resolution came slowly, but it was unmistakable. Within 2 weeks, Louise noticed she was sleeping better. Within a month, her daughter noticed she seemed calmer. Within 3 months, Louise realized she had stopped carrying the low-grade anxiety that had lived in her chest for years, the feeling that she was forgetting something important, that she was supposed to be doing something else, that nothing she did was ever quite enough. Her sister, Patricia Caldwell, 72, from Lancaster, Pennsylvania, visited her that Christmas and asked her what had changed, and Louise told her about the rosary, about moving it out of her purse and into the wooden box, about what the Franciscan sister had said, about what Pope John Paul II had told those women in Poland. Patricia went home and did the same thing. She had been carrying her rosary in her purse for 14 years, and within 2 weeks she called Louise and said, "I don't know how to explain this, but I feel like I can finally hear myself pray." Louise said to her sister, and later wrote in a letter to the retreat center, I thought I was honoring the Rosary by keeping it with me all the time, but I was burying it under everything I was afraid of, and when I finally gave it a place of its own, it gave me back the peace I thought I had lost forever. What Pope John Paul II knew, what he tried to tell people over and over in different ways throughout his pontificate, was that the Rosary is not a good luck charm. It is not a protective amulet. It is a form of prayer, and prayer requires separation from the world. It requires a space that is set apart. It requires your full attention and the object's full freedom from everything that is not God. The Rosary that lives in your purse is praying for your grocery list, your unpaid bills, your doctor's appointments, your unfinished errands, because that is what it is touching all day long. The Rosary that lives in a sacred space, a space you have set apart for prayer and nothing else, is praying for your soul. In the Gospel of Matthew chapter 6, verse 6, Jesus said, "When you pray, go into your room and shut the door and pray to your Father who is in secret, and your Father who sees in secret will reward you." The room he is talking about is not just a physical space. It is a space in your life that is protected from everything else, and your Rosary deserves that same protection. The 5 places you must never leave your Rosary overnight are these. Never leave your Rosary in the bathroom where it absorbs what the body releases. Never leave it in the drawer where you keep broken things, because it will carry the weight of incompletion. Never leave it on top of the television where it rests in the space of distraction. Never leave it underneath your pillow where it spends the night soaking in your unconscious fears. And never, ever leave it inside your purse where it is tangled with the chaos of everything you are trying to manage. Instead, give your Rosary one sacred space, a small box or a shelf or a table in the corner of the room where you pray, a place where it is separated from the world and dedicated only to God. And when you pick it up to pray, pick it up from that space, clean and untangled and free. Pope John Paul II kept his personal Rosary in a wooden case beside his prie-dieu, the kneeler where he prayed every morning before dawn. And he told those close to him that the Rosary should be the first thing you reach for in prayer and the last thing you touch before you sleep, but it should never be the thing you carry into the marketplace of your daily anxieties. Tonight, before you go to bed, I want you to find your Rosary. I want you to check where it has been resting. If it is in any of the 5 places Pope John Paul II warned against, I want you to move it tonight, right now, before you sleep. Find a small box, a shelf, a table, any surface in your home that is set apart for prayer, and place your Rosary there. If you do not have a space like that yet, create one tonight. It does not have to be elaborate. It can be one corner of one table with nothing else on it except your Rosary and maybe a candle or a small image of Mary. Then I want you to pray 1 decade, just one, holding the Rosary in your hands after it has rested in that new sacred space, and notice if it feels different. Notice if the words come easier. Notice if your mind is quieter. Pope John Paul II, who prayed through assassination attempts and illness and the weight of leading the universal church through some of the darkest years of the 20th century, never once prayed a Rosary that had spent the night tangled in the chaos of the world. Because he knew that the Rosary's power is not in the beads, it is in the prayer, and the prayer cannot be full if the beads are not free. Write in the comments tonight, "I commit," because committing to move your Rosary out of the places that block its power and into a space that protects its purpose is not a small thing. It is the decision that separates a woman who prays from a woman whose prayers reach heaven without interference. You know a woman in your parish who has been praying faithfully for years, who prays the Rosary almost every day, but whose prayers feel blocked, and who does not know that her Rosary may be resting in one of the 5 places Pope John Paul II warned against, and she needs to hear this. You know a daughter or a granddaughter who keeps her rosary in her purse or on top of the television or under her pillow, who thinks she is being faithful by keeping it close, and who does not know that proximity without separation is not protection, it is entanglement. You know a friend whose family has been struggling spiritually, who has tried everything, every novena, every devotion, every prayer, and who has never once thought to check where her rosary has been spending the night. Send this video to them, not as advice, not as correction, but as protection, the kind of protection faithful Catholics have always passed to each other when they discover a truth that explains the suffering they could not name. This is not about sharing a video. This is about passing a warning to someone who is praying in the dark and does not know that the answer is not in praying harder. It is in verifying whether the object she is praying with has been resting in a place that blocks what she is asking for. May the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit bless your home tonight and protect the space where you pray, the space you are creating right now, by moving your rosary out of the chaos and into the silence where it was always meant to rest. May Pope John Paul II, who suffered and prayed and persevered through every attack the enemy sent against him, intercede for you tonight as you take this one step to protect your prayer life from the places that have been working against it without you knowing. When these 5 places are cleared, when your rosary rests in a space set apart for God alone, your prayers will no longer feel like they are hitting a ceiling. They will feel like they are finally reaching the heart of the mother who has been waiting to carry them to her son. You were never praying wrong. You were praying with something that was absorbing everything except your faith. And tonight, that changes.